They say fear has a smell. That terror leaves a taste in your mouth that no amount of synthetic nutrition can wash away. I never believed such primitive nonsense until the day I stood shoulder to shoulder with humans on the killing fields of Zerion Prime. My name is Zektar, and was a decorated officer in the Galactic Coalition fleet. For 3 decades, I commanded vessels across 17 star systems, earning respect through calculated tactics and superior technology. I thought I understood warfare. I thought I understood courage. I was wrong about everything. This is the story of how a single battle changed not just the course of an interstellar war, but my entire understanding of what it means to fight, to survive, and to witness something so terrifying that it defies every law of nature and reason I once held sacred. The humans call it going dark. I call it the moment I realized why the galaxy's most feared predators don't hunt humans. They're too afraid of what they might find staring back. The first time Zektar met a human, he nearly laughed. Standing barely reaching his chest plates, the creature looked soft and vulnerable, its pale skin unmarked by the battle scars that decorated every respectable warrior species in the galaxy. The human wore the standard Coalition uniform. But something about the way it carried itself made Zektar's tactical instincts twitch with unease. Captain Sarah Chen extended her hand in the peculiar human greeting ritual. Her grip was firm, surprisingly so, but what caught Zektar's attention was her eyes. Most species betrayed their emotional state through body language, scent markers, or bioluminescent displays. Human eyes, however, seemed to contain depths that even his advanced neural scanners couldn't penetrate. "Commander Zektar," Chen said, her voice carrying an odd quality that made his translator hesitate for microseconds before processing. "I've read your tactical reports from the vegan campaigns. Impressive work." The briefing room aboard the Coalition Dreadnought Eternal Vigilance hummed with the nervous energy of a dozen different species preparing for what military analysts called a standard extraction operation. Intelligence had located a Coalition research facility on Zerion Prime, deep in enemy territory. The Krillian Empire had overrun the planet 3 cycles ago, but the facility contained classified technology that couldn't fall into enemy hands. Zektar studied the holographic display showing Zerion Prime's surface. The planet was a death trap. Dense jungle canopy concealed Krillian hunter-killer teams, while the facility itself sat in a valley surrounded by elevated positions perfect for enemy artillery. Satellite imagery showed at least 3 divisions of Krillian warriors dug into defensive positions. "The mission parameters are clear," announced Admiral Vexthan, his insectoid features clicking with authority. "Fast insertion, secure the data cores, eliminate any Krillian presence, and extraction within 6 standard hours. The Krillian reinforcements are already en route from their staging area in the Proxima system." Around the table, various species nodded their understanding. The Altarians flexed their crystalline carapaces, while the Drakmari checked their plasma weapons with professional efficiency. Everyone understood their role in the operation except for the humans. There were only 12 of them assigned to the mission, a pathetically small number compared to the 200 Coalition troops being deployed. Zektar had commanded thousands in major engagements. 12 soldiers couldn't even form a proper assault squad by Coalition standards. "What exactly will the human contingent be doing?" Zektar asked, his translator carefully modulating his tone to avoid offense. Captain Chen smiled, but the expression didn't reach those unsettling eyes. "Support operations, Commander. We'll handle any complications that arise." The answer was diplomatically vague, which irritated Zektar. In his experience, vague mission parameters led to tactical disasters. He made a mental note to keep the humans positioned safely behind the main assault force. Their species was new to the Coalition, barely 2 decades since first contact, and their combat capabilities remained largely theoretical. The journey to Zerion Prime took 18 hours through hyperspace. Zektar used the time to study his troops and review tactical scenarios. His own unit consisted of 40 Drakmari shock troopers, beings bred for warfare over millennia of selective evolution. Each warrior stood 8 feet tall, their scaled hide capable of deflecting small arms fire, their reflexes enhanced by cybernetic implants that processed battlefield data faster than most species could think. The humans kept to themselves during the journey, occupying a small section of the transport bay. Zektar observed them through the ship's security feeds, trying to understand what made them valuable enough for Coalition Command to include in such a critical mission. They seemed to spend most of their time in what appeared to be meditation. Sitting in complete silence, breathing in synchronized patterns, their bodies so still that the motion sensors occasionally lost track of them entirely. When they did move, it was with a precision that reminded Zektar of maintenance droids. Each gesture, economical, and purposeful. The most unsettling thing was their weapons check. Every other species aboard performed elaborate rituals when preparing their equipment. The Altarians sang harmonic frequencies to calibrate their energy weapons. The Drakmari engaged in ceremonial combat to sharpen their reflexes. The humans simply sat with their weapons across their laps, running their fingers over every component with the tenderness one might show a beloved pet. Their equipment was primitive by galactic standards. Kinetic projectile weapons that fired solid metal bullets, chemical explosives, and simple optical scopes. No plasma conduits, no quantum targeting systems, no molecular disruptors. Zektar couldn't understand how such basic technology could be effective against Krillian warriors whose exoskeletons could shrug off most conventional weapons. 6 hours before planetfall, Captain Chen approached Zektar's position in the tactical center. She moved through the cramped space between species 3 times her size with an ease that seemed to defy physics. Other beings had to duck under equipment or squeeze past control stations. Chen simply flowed around obstacles as if she had mapped every possible path in advance. "Commander, I wanted to discuss our deployment strategy," she said, settling into a chair designed for beings twice her mass. "My current plan has your unit providing rear security while the main force advances on the facility," Zektar replied, calling up a holographic battlefield display. "Your people can establish a perimeter here, approximately 2 kilometers from the primary objective." Chen studied the display for a long moment, her head tilted at an angle that made Zektar think of predatory birds he'd encountered on primitive worlds. "With respect, Commander, I think you misunderstand our capabilities. Enlighten me." Instead of answering directly, Chen manipulated the holographic controls with surprising dexterity. The display shifted to show detailed terrain features around the research facility. Krillian doctrine favors entrenched positions with overlapping fields of fire. They'll have positioned their heavy weapons on these ridgelines, with mobile hunter teams in the jungle approaches. Standard coalition tactics would require a frontal assault with acceptable losses estimated at 30 to 40%. Zektar's respect for the human increased marginally. Her tactical analysis matched his own projections. That assessment is correct. However, the mission priority is securing the data cores, not minimizing casualties. Coalition Command has approved the loss parameters. What if there was another way? The question hung in the recycled air to the transport. Around them, the subtle vibrations of the ship's engines provided a constant reminder that they were racing through hyperspace toward a world where many of them would likely die. "Explain." Chen's fingers danced across the holographic controls, highlighting positions that Zektar hadn't considered significant. Krillian warriors are formidable opponents, but they have predictable behavioral patterns. They excel at defensive warfare but struggle with rapid tactical adaptation. If we could create sufficient chaos in their rear positions while maintaining pressure on their forward elements, the tactical display showed a complex multi-phase assault that would require precise timing and coordination between units separated by kilometers of hostile terrain. It was ambitious to the point of being reckless, requiring several teams to operate independently in enemy territory with no possibility of reinforcement. "The margin for error is essentially zero," Zektar pointed out. "If any element of your plan fails, the entire operation collapses." "Yes, sir." "And you believe your 12 soldiers are capable of executing these infiltration missions against entrenched Krillian positions?" Captain Chen's smile returned, and this time it did reach her eyes. The expression sent an inexplicable chill through Zektar's nervous system. "Commander, with all due respect, you still don't understand what humans are." Before Zektar could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "All personnel to battle stations. Translation to normal space in 30 minutes. Xerion Prime approach commencing." The human captain stood with that same fluid grace, but something had changed in her posture. Where before she had seemed small and harmless, now she radiated a focused intensity that made the air around her feel charged with potential energy. "You'll understand soon enough, Commander," Chen said as she headed back to her unit. "Just remember, when things get complicated down there, stay behind us, not for your protection, but for theirs." As the ship shuddered into normal space above Xerion Prime, Zektar found himself staring at the tactical display, trying to process Chen's parting words. Behind them? Behind the humans? The comment made no tactical sense. The humans were the least experienced, least equipped, and smallest unit in the entire operation. The planet below appeared on the main view screen, a green and brown marble streaked with the dark clouds of an approaching storm system. Somewhere beneath that atmospheric layer waited an unknown number of Krillian warriors in prepared positions, defending technology that could shift the balance of power in the ongoing war. Zektar had commanded successful operations against odds far worse than these. He had faced enemies that could tear through battle armor with their bare claws, species that could phase through solid matter, and warriors whose reaction times were measured in microseconds rather than the standard milliseconds. But as the transport ships launched from the Dreadnought's bays, carrying their mixed cargo of coalition forces toward the surface of Zerion Prime, Zektar couldn't shake the memory of Captain Chen's smile, or the way her eyes had seemed to look through him, rather than at him. The tactical display showed their approach vector, descent trajectory, and projected landing zones. Everything proceeded according to plan. The mission parameters were clear, the enemy positions identified, and the objectives well defined. What Zektar didn't know was that he was about to witness something that would fundamentally change his understanding of warfare, courage, and the terrifying potential that existed within the small, soft creatures that called themselves human. The transport ship entered Zerion Prime's atmosphere with the subtle vibration that indicated atmospheric contact. Through the viewports, the jungle canopy stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the metallic glint of the research facility nestled in its valley clearing. Somewhere in that green expanse, Krillian warriors waited, with weapons trained skyward, ready to turn the Coalition's extraction operation into a massacre. They had no idea that they were about to face something far more dangerous than superior numbers or advanced technology. They were about to face humanity at war. The first indication that something was wrong came during the orbital descent. Zektar's transport shook violently as Krillian surface-to-air missiles streaked past the viewports, their plasma warheads painting brief flowers of destruction against the darkening sky. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, with professional calm that barely masked underlying tension. Multiple missile locks detected. Evasive maneuvers initiating. All personnel prepare for combat landing. Through the chaos of defensive fire and atmospheric turbulence, Zektar watched the tactical display update with enemy positions. Intelligence had been wrong. Instead of 3 divisions, the Krylians had at least 5 full battle groups dug into the jungle around the research facility. The numbers weren't just unfavorable, they were catastrophic. Coalition Command, this is Strike Leader Zekar. He transmitted on the command frequency. Enemy strength estimates were significantly underestimated. Recommend abort and tactical withdrawal. The response came back through layers of encryption and static. Negative, Strike Leader. Mission is classified critical priority. Data cores must be secured regardless of opposition strength. You have full tactical authority to complete objectives. Zektar's mandibles clicked in frustration. Critical priority meant the technology on Zerion Prime was worth sacrificing every Coalition soldier in the operation if necessary. He had been in enough classified briefings to understand that certain discoveries could shift the balance of power in the galactic war. Whatever the research facility contained, Coalition Command considered it more valuable than the lives of everyone aboard the transport ships now screaming through Zerion Prime's atmosphere. The landing zone erupted in explosions as Krillian artillery found their range. Massive trees vaporized in plasma fire while the ground itself seemed to liquefy under the barrage. Zektar's transport pilot pulled off a landing that defied several laws of physics, setting the craft down in a clearing barely large enough to contain its bulk, while avoiding the worst of the enemy fire. All units, this is Strike Leader. Zektar transmitted as his Drakmari shock troopers deployed from the transport. Primary landing zone is compromised. Scatter pattern deployment. Rally point Alpha in 30 minutes. Watch for Krillian hunter teams in the jungle approaches. His warriors moved with practiced efficiency, their scaled hides already adapting to the local environment's color spectrum. Each Drakmari carried enough firepower to level a city block, their plasma rifles charging with the distinctive whine that had terrified enemies across the galaxy for generations. These were professional soldiers bred for war, enhanced with cybernetics and equipped with the finest weapons Coalition technology could produce. They should have been unstoppable. The first Krillian attack came within minutes of touchdown. The enemy warriors moved through the jungle canopy like living shadows, their chitinous exoskeletons perfectly suited for the dense vegetation. Krylians stood 9 feet tall in their adult form, with forearms ending in razor-sharp claws capable of tearing through most armor systems. Their compound eyes could track multiple targets simultaneously, while their nervous systems processed combat data fast enough to dodge aimed fire. Zektar's first indication of their presence was the death scream of one of his point scouts, a sound that cut through the jungle noise with mechanical precision. The Drakmari warrior's life signs vanished from his tactical display so quickly that the monitoring system registered it as a sensor malfunction. Contact front, came the next transmission, followed by the distinctive sound of plasma fire. Multiple Kralian warriors, estimate squad strength, requesting immediate support. Through his neural link to the battlefield network, Zektar could see his soldiers engaging the enemy with textbook tactics. Overlapping fields of fire, coordinated movement, proper use of cover and concealment. Everything proceeded exactly as their training dictated, and his warriors were dying anyway. Kryllian warriors absorbed plasma fire that should have vaporized them, their exoskeletons dispersing energy across their surface area while they closed distance for melee combat. When they reached coalition positions, the slaughter became personal. Claws designed by millions of years of evolution tore through armor plating like fabric. Mandibles that could crack starship hull material bit through Drakmari necks with casual efficiency. All units consolidate on Rally Point Alpha, Zektar ordered, his tactical computer painting an increasingly desperate picture. They had been on the ground for less than an hour and had already lost 20% of their force. At this rate, they would be wiped out long before reaching the research facility. The rally point was a small clearing dominated by the twisted remains of some massive jungle tree, its trunk easily 50 meters in diameter. Coalition forces from multiple landing zones converged on the position, their various species clustering together in the face of mounting enemy pressure. Altarians flickered in and out of visibility as they manipulated local light spectra. Vegan engineers worked frantically to establish defensive barriers using portable force field generators. Everyone understood that they were surrounded and outnumbered. Everyone except the humans. Captain Chen's unit had somehow reached the rally point first, despite landing furthest from the designated coordinates. Her 12 soldiers had established a perimeter with their primitive kinetic weapons, but what struck Zektar as odd was their positioning. Instead of seeking cover behind the available barriers, they had spread out in seemingly random locations that offered no tactical advantage he could identify. "Captain Chen, adjust your positions to coordinates I'm sending to your tactical display," Zektar transmitted. "Your current deployment leaves multiple approach vectors uncovered." Chen's response came back with an undertone that Zektar's translator struggled to process. "Negative, Commander. We're exactly where we need to be." Before Zektar could question the human's tactical judgment, his sensors detected movement in the jungle perimeter. Lots of movement. The Kryllians were preparing for a coordinated assault that would overrun the coalition position through sheer weight of numbers. His tactical computer calculated their survival chances at less than 12%. "All units, prepare for massive enemy assault," he transmitted. "Weapons-free, full defensive positions. Make every shot count." The jungle erupted with Kryllian battle cries. A sound like industrial machinery mixed with the screams of dying worlds. Through the dense vegetation came waves of enemy warriors, their exoskeletons gleaming with built-in weapon systems, and their 4 arms wielding everything from energy blades to projectile weapons of their own design. They moved with the coordinated precision of a hive mind, each warrior knowing exactly where every other warrior would be at any given moment. Coalition forces opened fire with everything they had. Plasma beams carved through the jungle canopy while particle weapons vaporized entire sections of vegetation. The air itself seemed to catch fire as various energy systems discharged their stored power in desperate attempts to stop the advancing enemy. The Kryllians absorbed the punishment and kept coming. That was when Zektar heard something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. From the positions occupied by the human soldiers came a sound that his translator couldn't process. A vocalization that seemed to bypass his auditory system entirely and speak directly to the most primitive parts of his brain. The humans were laughing. Not the polite social laughter he had observed during diplomatic functions, but something primal and terrifying that seemed to emerge from the deepest wells of their species' evolutionary history. It was the sound a predator makes when it finally corners prey that has been running for too long. The first Kryllian warrior to reach the human perimeter simply disappeared. One moment it was charging through the undergrowth with claws extended, the next moment there was empty space where it had been. Zektar's enhanced vision caught a glimpse of motion too fast for his neural processors to track, followed by the wet sound of something organic being torn apart. A human soldier materialized from vegetation that Zektar would have sworn was empty, his primitive kinetic weapon somehow having reduced a 9-foot Kryllian warrior to component parts in the time it took to blink. The soldier's face was completely calm, his movements efficient and economical, but his eyes held something that made Zektar's survival instincts scream warnings. The battle devolved into chaos as more Kryllians reached the coalition perimeter. Zektar watched his Drakmari warriors, beings he had considered the finest soldiers in the galaxy, struggle against enemies whose natural advantages seemed overwhelming. Plasma fire that should have been instantly lethal barely slowed the Kryllians down. Hand-to-hand combat was suicide against creatures with 4 arms and natural weapons that could penetrate most armor systems. But where his trained warriors were fighting desperately for survival, The humans seemed to be engaged in some entirely different activity. They moved through the battlefield like forces of nature, appearing where they were needed most and vanishing before enemy fire could find them. Their primitive weapons produced effects that defied everything Zektar thought he knew about ballistic physics. A human soldier armed with what appeared to be an ancient chemical explosive weapon somehow used it to eliminate 6 Krillian warriors simultaneously, despite the fact that the blast should have been contained by their natural armor. Another human engaged 3 Krillians in melee combat using nothing but a metal blade and emerged victorious, apparently uninjured, while the enemy warriors lay in pieces around his position. The most disturbing thing was their communication patterns. Coalition forces maintained constant tactical chatter, coordinating movements and sharing target information through their neural networks. The humans spoke in short phrases that seemed almost casual, as if discussing weather conditions rather than life and death combat. Contact left, 2 bogeys. Confirmed. I got them. Watch your 6, movement in the canopy. Already handled. Their weapons fire was impossibly precise, each shot finding gaps in Krillian armor that Zektar's advanced targeting systems couldn't even detect. They moved through 3-dimensional space like they had grown up in jungle environments, using vegetation and terrain features in ways that seemed to defy gravitational laws. But what truly terrified Zektar was their apparent immunity to fear. Every other species in the coalition exhibited stress responses during combat. Elevated heart rates, chemical markers indicating adrenaline production, neural patterns showing the strain of life or death decision-making. The humans registered none of these indicators. Their biological signs remained as steady as if they were performing routine maintenance tasks. A Krillian hunter team broke through the coalition perimeter and charged directly towards Zektar's command position. 4 warriors in perfect formation, their movement coordinated to overwhelm his bodyguard detail before he could retreat to secondary positions. His Drakmari guards opened fire with everything they had, scoring multiple hits that should have been instantly fatal. The Krillians kept coming. Just as Zektar was calculating whether he could reach his emergency beacon before the enemy reached him, Captain Chen appeared between his position and the charging warriors. She carried only a small kinetic weapon and what appeared to be a metal blade. Against 4 Krillian shock troops, she should have been dead before she could raise her weapon. Instead, she smiled. What happened next took less than 3 seconds but seemed to stretch across eternity. Chen moved in a way that Zektar's eyes couldn't follow, becoming a blur of motion that seemed to occupy multiple positions simultaneously. Her weapon fired repeatedly, each shot perfectly placed to exploit structural weaknesses in Krillian armor that no coalition scientist had ever identified. Her blade found joints and nerve clusters with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of enemy anatomy. When the motion stopped, 4 Krillian warriors lay motionless while Captain Chen stood exactly where she had begun, apparently uninjured and completely calm. She looked at Zektar with those unsettling eyes and spoke in a tone that might have been used to comment on the weather. "Commander, you should probably stay behind us from now on." The jungle fell silent after the initial assault, but Zektar knew better than to trust the quiet. His tactical sensors showed dozens of Krillian life signs moving through the dense vegetation, repositioning for another attack. The enemy had tested coalition defenses and found them wanting. The next assault would be designed to eliminate resistance entirely. Casualties from the first engagement were worse than Zektar's worst projections. 37 coalition soldiers dead or missing, with another dozen wounded seriously enough to require medical evacuation that couldn't come until the mission was complete. His force had been reduced to barely 60% combat effectiveness in less than 2 hours planetside. The humans had suffered 0 casualties. Zektar studied Captain Chen as she coordinated with her soldiers using hand signals that seemed more complex than most species' entire communication systems. Her 12-person unit had somehow managed to eliminate more than 40 Krillian warriors during the engagement, a kill ratio that defied every principle of tactical mathematics he had ever learned. "Captain, I need to understand how your people achieved these results," Zektar said, approaching her position near the twisted tree that served as their rallying point. "Coalition Command will want detailed after-action reports." Chen looked up from the weapon she was cleaning, her movements precise and economical. The kinetic rifle showed no signs of the extensive use it had obviously seen during the battle. "Commander, with respect, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." Instead of answering directly, Chen gestured toward one of her soldiers who was examining a section of jungle where several Krillian warriors had fallen. Sergeant Rodriguez, according to Zektar's personnel files, was a relatively young human with limited combat experience by Coalition standards. Yet Zektar had watched him single-handedly eliminate 6 enemy warriors using tactics that seemed to violate several laws of physics. Rodriguez grew up hunting predators in the Amazon basin on Earth, Chen explained. Creatures that could kill him with a single mistake. In an environment where visibility was measured in meters rather than kilometers. By the time he was 16, he could track, ambush, and eliminate threats that had evolved specifically to hunt primates like humans. Zektar's translator struggled with several terms in Chen's explanation. Amazon basin? I'm not familiar with this military installation. It's not a military installation, Commander. It's where Rodriguez lived as a child. The Amazon is a jungle that covers millions of square kilometers on our homeworld. Humans have been living in environments like this for hundreds of thousands of years. The implications of Chen's words sent cold currents through Zektar's nervous system. You're saying your soldiers learned these skills as children? For survival? Commander, you've been thinking about this all wrong. You see 12 soldiers with primitive weapons fighting against superior numbers. What you're actually seeing is apex predators in their natural environment. Chen's smile returned, and Zektar found himself taking an involuntary step backward. Humans didn't evolve on a garden world with abundant resources and peaceful herbivores. Earth tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. Everything we learned because the alternative was extinction. Before Zektar could process the full meaning of her words, his tactical sensors screamed warnings. Movement signatures throughout the jungle indicated a massive enemy formation approaching from multiple vectors. The Krillians were committing everything they had to overrunning the Coalition position. All units, enemy contact imminent, Zektar transmitted. Full defensive positions, prepare for sustained engagement. Coalition soldiers scrambled to established firing positions, while medical personnel moved the wounded to the most protected areas available. Weapon systems charged with the distinctive whines and hums of different energy technologies preparing to discharge lethal force. Everyone understood that this engagement would determine whether any of them lived to see extraction. The humans simply vanished. One moment they were visible around the perimeter, the next moment Zektar's sensors couldn't locate them anywhere in the immediate area. His tactical display showed 12 human signatures scattered throughout the jungle in positions that made no sense according to any defensive doctrine he had ever studied. Captain Chen, your unit is out of position. Zektar transmitted on the command frequency. Return to designated defensive coordinates immediately. Chen's response came back with an odd quality that made his translator pause before processing the words. Negative, Commander. We're going hunting. The Krillian assault began with artillery fire that turned sections of the jungle into blazing craters. Trees that had stood for centuries vaporized under plasma bombardment while the ground itself seemed to convulse from the impacts. Through the chaos came wave after wave of enemy warriors, their battle cries mixing with the sounds of destruction to create an audio environment that threatened to overwhelm Zektar's sensory filters. Coalition forces returned fire with disciplined volleys that carved through advancing enemy ranks. Altarian energy weapons created temporary miniature stars that incinerated everything within their burst radius. Drakmari plasma rifles fired streams of superheated matter that could punch through starship hulls. Vegan particle beam systems manipulated subatomic forces to tear apart molecular bonds in living tissue. The Krillians absorbed the punishment and kept advancing. That was when the screaming started. From deep within the jungle came sounds that Zektar's translator refused to process, vocalizations that seemed to bypass language entirely and communicate pure terror. Krillian warriors, beings that had never shown fear in hundreds of battles across dozens of worlds, were making sounds that spoke to the most primitive survival instincts of every living creature that heard them. Through his tactical network, Zektar began receiving fragmentary reports from Krillian communication systems that his equipment had intercepted. The enemy's disciplined battle coordination was breaking down into chaos as unit commanders lost contact with their forward elements. Sector 7, report status. Sector 7 is gone. Something took them. We found pieces. What do you mean pieces? I mean pieces. Johnson, get away from that tree line. Get away from! The transmission cut off in static and screaming. Similar reports flooded the Krillian command frequencies as their organized assault dissolved into isolated pockets of terrified warriors trying to understand what was hunting them in the jungle. Zektar's sensors showed human life signs moving through enemy positions like ghosts, appearing just long enough to eliminate targets before vanishing back into vegetation that shouldn't have been able to conceal beings of their size. The tactical situation reversed itself in minutes. Instead of defending against overwhelming assault, Coalition forces found themselves in the position of observers watching Krillian warriors flee in panic from an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't fight. The sounds coming from the jungle were no longer battle cries, but the desperate communications of a species that had suddenly found itself on the wrong end of a predator-prey relationship. Unknown contacts in Sector 5 request immediate backup. Backup is gone. Everything is gone. They're in the trees. They're in the ground. How are they in the ground? Maintain formation. Do not separate from your unit. What formation? Half my unit is missing. The other half is... Oh gods, something's moving behind me. Zektar realized he was witnessing something that had never been recorded in galactic military history. The Krillians, a species that had conquered 17 star systems through sheer ferocity and tactical superiority, were being systematically terrorized by 12 humans with primitive weapons. The first Krillian survivors began emerging from the jungle in a state that Zektar's medical scanners classified as severe psychological trauma. These were warriors whose neural patterns showed damage consistent with exposure to stimuli beyond their species' ability to process. They moved in erratic patterns, their natural coordination destroyed by experiences that their evolutionary programming couldn't integrate. Please. One of them transmitted on an open frequency, its translator struggling with vocalizations never designed for coalition communication systems. Make them stop. We surrender, we surrender. Captain Chen materialized from vegetation barely 10 meters from Zektar's position, her appearance so sudden that his bodyguards nearly opened fire before recognizing her coalition uniform. She looked exactly as she had before the battle began. No sign of the extended combat that had just reduced an entire Krillian battle group to a collection of terrified survivors. Commander, the perimeter is secure, she reported in the same tone she might have used to announce the weather forecast. We've eliminated approximately 80% of enemy forces. The remainder are in full retreat toward the research facility. Zektar's tactical display confirmed Chen's assessment. Krillian signatures throughout the jungle were indeed moving rapidly away from coalition positions, abandoning equipment and wounded in their haste to escape whatever had been stalking them through their own ambush. Captain, what exactly did your people do out there? Chen's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested depths that Zektar was only beginning to understand. We did what humans have always done, Commander. We turned the hunt around. As coalition forces began advancing toward their primary objective, Zektar found himself studying the human soldiers with new eyes. They moved through the jungle with an ease that suggested they were more comfortable in hostile environments than in the sterile corridors of starships. Their primitive weapons were maintained with a care that spoke to intimate familiarity born of absolute dependence. Most disturbing, they showed no signs of stress or fatigue, despite having just completed what should have been an exhausting engagement against superior numbers. Captain, I need to ask you something, Zektar said as they approached the valley containing the research facility. How long has your species been capable of this level of combat effectiveness? Chen considered the question for a long moment before answering. Commander, what you saw today wasn't special combat training or advanced technology. This is just what humans do when we stop pretending to be civilized. Through the jungle canopy ahead, the research facility's metallic structures gleamed in Zerian Prime's afternoon sunlight. Intelligence reports indicated heavy fortification with automated defense systems and at least 1 battalion of Krillian defenders. Under normal circumstances, assaulting such a position would require massive artillery support and acceptable casualty rates measured in hundreds of lives. But as Zektar watched the human soldiers preparing their primitive weapons with that same disturbing care, he began to suspect that normal circumstances no longer applied. Whatever was waiting for them at the research facility was about to learn the same lesson that the jungle ambush teams had just been taught. They weren't fighting coalition soldiers equipped with advanced technology. They were about to face something far more dangerous, humans who had decided that diplomacy was over. The research facility squatted in the valley like a metallic cancer, its angular structures reflecting Zerian Prime's dual suns in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Zektar's tactical scanners painted a grim picture of the defenses waiting for them. Automated plasma turrets tracked movement along every approach vector. Force field barriers created overlapping protective layers around the main complex. Energy signatures indicated at least 3 different types of defensive systems that his database couldn't identify. Intelligence estimates suggested a full Krillian battalion held the facility. Approximately 800 warriors dug into positions that had been reinforced over 3 years of occupation. The complex itself was designed for research rather than warfare, but the enemy had turned every corridor into a kill zone and every room into a potential ambush point. Standard assault doctrine would require a minimum of 2,000 coalition troops with full artillery support, Zektar muttered, studying the holographic display that showed the facility's layout. We have 63 effectives, and no heavy weapons. Captain Chen crouched beside him at the observation point they had established on the valley's rim. Through her primitive optical scope, she examined the same target that had Zektar's advanced sensors working overtime to penetrate. "Commander, you're still thinking about this wrong," she said without lowering her weapon. "You see a fortress that needs to be conquered. I see a trap that needs to be turned inside out." Before Zektar could ask what she meant, his communication system received a priority transmission from Coalition Command. The message was brief and carried the highest possible classification level. Strike Leader. New intelligence indicates the research facility contains prototype weapons capable of destabilizing stellar formations. Under no circumstances can this technology fall into enemy hands. If facility cannot be secured, implement Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7 meant total annihilation. Nuclear fire that would sterilize the entire valley and everything in it, including any coalition forces still on the ground. Command was telling him that the mission had become a suicide run, that the technology waiting in that facility was worth sacrificing everyone in his unit to keep from Krillian hands. "Chen, did you receive that transmission?" The human captain nodded, her expression unchanged. "Stellar destabilization weapons. Interesting. That explains why they've been so willing to commit resources to holding this position. It also means that failure is not an option. If we can't secure those data cores, we'll be ordered to trigger a nuclear device that will eliminate everything within 50 kilometers of our current position. Most species would have shown stress responses to learning they were on a suicide mission. Elevated heart rates, chemical markers indicating fear or anxiety, neural patterns showing the strain of processing their own mortality. Captain Chen's biological readings remained as steady as if she were discussing supply requisitions. "Commander, how long do we have before Coalition Command implements Protocol 7? Zektar checked his mission chronometer. 18 hours. If we haven't secured the facility and extracted by then, the nuclear device will detonate automatically. More than enough time." The casual confidence in Chen's voice was almost insulting. Zektar had commanded successful operations against odds far better than these, and he knew that 18 hours wasn't nearly enough time to assault a fortified position held by 800 enemy warriors using conventional tactics. "Captain, I need to understand what your people are planning. Standard approaches to this facility will result in total casualties within the first hour of engagement." Chen finally lowered her optical scope and looked at Zektar with those unsettling eyes. "Commander, let me tell you something about human military history. We've been taking fortified positions from numerically superior enemies for our entire recorded civilization. The trick isn't to assault the fortress. Then what? You make the fortress assault itself." Before Zektar could ask for clarification, Chen was moving down the valley slope with that same fluid grace that seemed to ignore gravitational laws. Her soldiers followed in single file, each one choosing a path that somehow managed to avoid every automated sensor and motion detector that Zektar's scanners had identified. The remaining coalition forces took position on the valley rim to provide covering fire and serve as observers for the human infiltration attempt. Through his tactical network, Zektar could monitor the 12 human life signs as they approached the research facility's outer perimeter. What he saw defied every principle of stealth operations he had ever learned. Instead of avoiding the automated defense systems, the humans seemed to be deliberately triggering them. Plasma turrets swiveled to track movement that vanished before they could fire. Motion sensors registered contacts that disappeared between scanning cycles. The facility's defensive network began generating alert signals as its targeting systems tried to engage threats that apparently didn't exist. "Unknown contacts detected in perimeter zones 1 through 7. Came an intercepted Krillian transmission. "Defense systems unable to maintain target locks. Request manual visual confirmation. Confirmed. Multiple sensor ghosts throughout outer perimeter. Defense grid showing cascade failures in targeting protocols." Through his optical magnification system, Zektar watched human soldiers do things that his tactical training insisted were impossible. They moved through areas covered by overlapping fields of defensive fire without triggering a single weapon discharge. They climbed vertical surfaces that his analysis indicated couldn't support their body weight. Most disturbing, they seemed to predict where automated systems would be looking and simply weren't there when the sensors activated. "Captain Chen, what are your people doing to the defensive grid?" Zektar transmitted on a narrowed beam frequency. Chen's response came back with that same casual tone. "We're teaching it to be afraid." The statement made no sense. Automated defense systems were machines. collections of sensors and processors and weapon systems that followed programmed responses to detected threats. They couldn't experience fear any more than they could experience happiness or anger or any other emotion. But as Zektar watched, the facility's defensive behavior began changing in ways that suggested something approaching panic. Plasma turrets fired at empty air while motion sensors generated continuous alarm signals for threats they couldn't locate. The automated systems seemed to be developing paranoid response patterns, reacting to phantom contacts and consuming their energy reserves in desperate attempts to engage enemies that always seemed to be one step ahead of their targeting algorithms. Defensive grid malfunction in progress. Came another intercepted transmission. All automated systems showing erratic behavior patterns. Recommend manual override of targeting protocols. Manual override authorized. All units to visual targeting only. Repeat, do not rely on automated systems for threat identification. The chaos in the facility's defensive network created exactly the opening that conventional tactics would have required massive artillery bombardment to achieve. Force field barriers flickered as their control systems struggled to process contradictory sensor data. Automated weapon systems exhausted their power reserves, firing at targets that existed only in their increasingly confused algorithms. But what truly impressed Zektar was the precision with which the humans exploited each momentary gap in the defenses. As each system went offline or began malfunctioning, a human soldier would appear in exactly the right position to advance to the next phase of their approach. It was as if they had anticipated not just where the defenses would fail, but exactly when each failure would occur. "This is impossible," Zektar muttered to his tactical officer, a vegan engineer whose cybernetic implants could process battlefield data faster than most species could think. "They're moving through defensive systems that should be impenetrable." "Sir, I think they're not trying to penetrate the defenses," the engineer replied, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of confusion. "Analysis suggests they're causing the systems to penetrate themselves." Before Zektar could ask for clarification, the first human soldier reached the facility's main entrance. Instead of attempting to breach the heavily armored portal, Sergeant Rodriguez simply placed his hand on what appeared to be a maintenance access panel. Within seconds, the massive doors began cycling open with the mechanical precision of a system responding to authorized access codes. How did he access their security systems? Captain Chen's voice came back over the communication link, with what sounded almost like amusement. "He didn't, Commander. He convinced their security systems to access him." The explanation made no sense, but Zektar had stopped trying to apply conventional logic to human tactical methods. Through the facility's now open entrance came sounds that his translator struggled to process. Not the organized sounds of military operations, but something that resembled the audio chaos of a natural disaster. Krillian warriors were screaming. Not the battle cries he had heard during their earlier engagements, but vocalizations that spoke to primal terror beyond anything their species had evolved to handle. Through the intercepted communication channels came fragmentary reports that painted a picture of complete tactical breakdown. Unknown hostiles in Section C. "They're not using the corridors." "How are they not using the corridors?" "Section C is sealed. All access points are secured. Nothing could have gotten through without triggering alarms." "Then explain the bodies." "I can't explain the bodies. I can't explain any of this." "Where are they coming from?" Zektar's tactical display showed human life signs moving through the facility, in patterns that suggested they were ignoring the architectural layout entirely. Corridors, sealed blast doors, and security checkpoints seemed to present no obstacles to their progress. They appeared in sections of the complex that his blueprints indicated were completely isolated from other areas. "Captain, are your people using some form of matter phase technology?"
Negative, Commander.
"We're just using the building the way it was designed to be used." The building was designed as a research facility, not for tactical infiltration. "Every building is designed for tactical infiltration, Commander. The architects just don't realize it when they're drawing up the plans." Through the communication intercepts, Zektar began to understand what was happening inside the research facility. The humans weren't fighting their way through Krillian defensive positions. They were somehow turning the facility's own infrastructure into a weapon against its defenders. Environmental systems compromised. Atmospheric processes showing cascade failures. Emergency lighting activated in sections A through F. Primary power grid unstable. Gravity generators fluctuating. Repeat. Gravity generators showing irregular patterns. Medical bay reports unknown biological agents in the air circulation system. Recommend full environmental suits for all personnel. Each system failure created new opportunities for the human soldiers to advance while simultaneously degrading Krillian defensive capabilities. Lights failed just as enemy warriors needed to identify targets. Gravity fluctuations disrupted Krillian movement patterns that depended on consistent gravitational orientation. Most disturbingly, the facility's own life support systems seemed to be turning against their occupants. Commander, you should probably prepare your people for rapid extraction. Chen transmitted. We'll have the data cores secured within the hour. 1 hour? Captain, there are 800 Krillian warriors in that facility. Not anymore, there aren't. The tactical display confirmed Chen's assessment. Krillian life signs throughout the complex were going offline at an accelerating rate. Not the quick disappearance that indicated death in combat, but the gradual fade that suggested beings were abandoning their positions and fleeing toward the facility's emergency exits. All units, this is Commander Zektul. Came a transmission from the Krillian leader. Implement full evacuation protocols. Repeat. Abandon current positions and evacuate immediately. Sir, we haven't secured the research data. Command ordered us to defend this position at all costs. Command didn't anticipate this. Whatever these creatures are, they're not coalition soldiers. I don't know what they are, but we cannot fight them in an enclosed environment. Evacuate now. That's a direct order. As Krillian warriors began streaming from the facility's emergency exits, Zektar found himself staring at a tactical situation that violated every principle of warfare he had ever studied. 12 human soldiers with primitive weapons had somehow forced 800 enemy warriors to abandon a fortified position without engaging in a single direct confrontation. Captain Chen, what exactly did your people do in there? Chen's response came back with that same casual tone, but this time Zektar thought he detected something else underneath. Something that might have been satisfaction or perhaps hunger finally satisfied. We reminded them what it feels like to be prey, Commander. The research facility stood empty except for the 12 human soldiers who moved through its corridors like they owned the place. Zektar descended into the valley with his remaining coalition forces, still trying to process what he had witnessed. 800 Krillian warriors had abandoned a position they had held for 3 years, fleeing from an enemy that had never fired a shot in direct confrontation. The facility's interior showed signs of hasty evacuation, weapons and equipment scattered in corridors, personal effects abandoned in quarters, even classified documents left unsecured on workstations. The Krillians had departed with such speed that they had violated their own security protocols rather than spend additional time in the same space as the human infiltrators. Captain Chen, what is your current status? Zektar transmitted as his forces approached the main entrance. Data cores are secured, Commander. We've also located some additional materials that Coalition Command will find interesting. Zektar made his way through corridors that his tactical sensors indicated should have been death traps. The facility's designers had created overlapping kill zones with multiple fallback positions, turning every intersection into a potential ambush point. Instead, he found empty spaces and the lingering traces of terror so intense that his equipment could measure stress pheromones in the air circulation system. He found Captain Chen in the facility's central data vault, a heavily shielded chamber designed to protect the most sensitive research materials from both enemy action and accidental release. She stood before a wall of data storage units, each one containing information that could shift the balance of power in the galactic war. The stellar destabilization research is more advanced than intelligence estimated, Chen reported, her tone carrying the same casual professionalism she had maintained throughout the operation. They weren't just theorizing about weapons that could destabilize stars. They had working prototypes. Zektar's sensors confirmed Chen's assessment. The data storage units contained technical specifications for weapons that could manipulate stellar nuclear processes, artificially triggering solar events that would sterilize entire star systems. In the wrong hands, such technology could eliminate billions of lives with surgical precision. How much of this material can we extract before the deadline? All of it, Commander. My people have already begun copying the data cores onto portable storage units. As if to demonstrate her point, human soldiers appeared in the vault carrying equipment that Zektar hadn't seen them bring into the facility. The storage devices they used were primitive by galactic standards, but they worked with the same mechanical precision that characterized all human equipment. Captain, where did your people acquire this extraction equipment? Chen's smile returned, and Zektar realized he was becoming accustomed to the way it made his survival instincts twitch with unease. We didn't acquire it, Commander. We made it. From what materials? From what was available? Before Zektar could pursue the question, his communication system received an urgent transmission from Coalition Command. The message was brief and carried priority encryption that indicated immediate action required. Strike Leader, long-range sensors have detected a Krallian battle fleet approaching Zirian Prime. Estimated arrival in 14 hours. You have 6 hours to complete extraction before our naval forces implement tactical withdrawal. The timeline had been cut by more than half. Instead of 18 hours to secure the facility and evacuate, they now had 6 hours before coalition ships would abandon the system to avoid engagement with superior enemy forces. If they weren't off-planet by then, they would be stranded on Zirian Prime with no possibility of rescue. Captain, did you receive that transmission? Confirmed, Commander. 6 hours for full extraction. Zektar's tactical computer calculated the logistical requirements for evacuating 63 coalition personnel plus the secured research materials. Under optimal conditions with dedicated transport ships, the operation would require a minimum of 8 hours. With the jury-rigged extraction equipment they were forced to use, 12 hours would be optimistic. We need to prioritize the most critical data cores and abandon the rest, Zektar announced. There's no way to extract everything in the time available. Actually, Commander, there is. Chen gestured toward her soldiers, who had somehow managed to reproduce the data extraction setup throughout the entire vault. Dozens of primitive storage devices worked in parallel, copying terabytes of information with speed that seemed to exceed their technological specifications. How is this possible? Your equipment shouldn't be capable of processing data at these transfer rates. You're right, it shouldn't be, Chen agreed. But we're not using our equipment to process the data. Then what are you using? Instead of answering directly, Chen led Zektar to a workstation where one of her soldiers sat before a Krallian computer interface. Sergeant Martinez appeared to be manipulating the alien system with the same ease that a trained technician might show with familiar equipment, despite the fact that human and Krallian technology operated on completely incompatible principles. Martinez grew up in Detroit, Chen explained. His father worked in manufacturing facilities that built everything from ground vehicles to aerospace components. By the time he was 12, Martinez could take apart any machine and put it back together better than it was before. Zektar watched in fascination as Martinez interfaced with technology that should have been completely alien to him. Krallian computer systems used quantum processing matrices that operated according to mathematical principles that most coalition species required advanced training to understand, yet the human soldier navigated the system's architecture as if he had designed it himself. Captain, this is impossible. Your soldier couldn't have learned Krallian computational theory in the time we've been in this facility. He didn't learn Krallian computational theory, Commander. He learned how machines think. The distinction seemed meaningless until Zektar watched Martinez identify incorrect efficiency problems in the Krallian data processing systems. The human soldier was somehow optimizing alien technology in real time, improving its performance beyond the parameters its designers had considered achievable. All machines want to work properly, Chen continued, her voice carrying that same matter-of-fact tone. They have optimal operating states that their designers usually approximate but rarely achieve. Martinez just helps them find those states. As if to prove her point, the data extraction process accelerated beyond what Zektar's instruments could measure accurately. Information flowed from the Krallian storage systems into human portable devices at transfer rates that violated several basic principles of data physics. Commander, we should probably discuss what happens after we leave this facility, Chen said as her soldiers continued their impossible work. The Krallians will return, eventually. They'll want to understand what happened here. Zektar had been dreading this conversation. Military protocol required detailed after-action reports that would analyze every aspect of the operation. Coalition Command would want to understand how 12 human soldiers had accomplished what should have required a full battle group with orbital support. Captain, I'm not sure I can write a report that accurately describes what I've witnessed today. Then don't. The suggestion was so casual that Zektar initially thought he had misunderstood. Captain, I'm required to file detailed mission reports with Coalition Command. Commander, let me ask you something. Do you think Coalition Command is ready to learn what humans are actually capable of? The question hung in the recycled air of the data vault, while around them human soldiers continued their methodical extraction of information that could reshape the galactic war. Zektar considered the implications of a detailed report that described humans casually terrorizing an entire battalion of Krallian warriors, turning automated defense systems against themselves and manipulating alien technology as if it were children's toys. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that some knowledge is dangerous, Commander. The galaxy has spent thousands of years developing rules for warfare, diplomacy, and coexistence between species. Those rules work because everyone follows them. If other species understood what humans could do when we stopped following the rules, Chen didn't need to finish the thought. Zektar had commanded enough military operations to understand the implications. The delicate balance of power that maintained galactic civilization depended on predictable capabilities and mutual deterrence. If one species possessed advantages that completely negated those assumptions, the entire system would collapse into chaos. What do you recommend I include in my report? Standard tactical operation. Coalition forces engaged enemy positions using superior training and equipment. Enemy withdrew due to unsustainable casualties. Mission objectives achieved within acceptable loss parameters. The suggested report was technically accurate while omitting every detail that mattered. It would satisfy Coalition Command's requirements for documentation without revealing anything about human combat capabilities that wasn't already part of official records. Captain, there's something I need to understand. If your people are capable of this level of tactical effectiveness, why haven't you demonstrated these abilities before? Chen's expression became serious for the first time since Zektar had met her. Commander, humans have been part of the Coalition for barely 20 years. We're still learning how to coexist with species that evolved under completely different selection pressures. Most of the galaxy assumes that warfare should follow certain rules, that there are acceptable methods and unacceptable methods for resolving conflicts. And humans don't agree with these rules?
Humans understand that rules only work when everyone follows them.
When someone threatens our survival or the survival of our allies, we do whatever is necessary to eliminate the threat. No rules, no acceptable casualties, no political considerations. Just results. Through the facility's communication system came reports that the final data cores had been successfully copied. 6 hours of work had been compressed into 2 hours through methods that Zektar still couldn't fully understand. The extraction operation was complete with time to spare for evacuation. As Coalition forces began withdrawing from the research facility, Zektar found himself looking back at the empty corridors where 800 Krillian warriors had fled in terror from 12 human soldiers. The facility would be reoccupied within days, but everyone who entered would know that something had happened here that defied conventional understanding of warfare. The journey to the extraction point proceeded without incident. Krillian survivors had retreated so far from the facility that Coalition forces encountered no resistance during their withdrawal. The jungle that had been filled with enemy hunter teams just hours before was now empty, except for the sounds of native wildlife reclaiming abandoned positions. As they waited for Coalition transport ships to arrive, Zektar watched the human soldiers clean their primitive weapons with the same careful attention they had shown throughout the operation. They showed no signs of fatigue despite having completed what should have been an exhausting mission. More disturbing, they showed no signs of satisfaction or accomplishment, as if terrorizing an entire enemy battalion was simply routine work that required no special recognition.
Captain Chen, I have one final question.
Yes, Commander? If this was a standard operation for human capabilities, what would constitute a difficult mission? Chen considered the question while she field-stripped her kinetic rifle with mechanical precision. Commander, humans have never actually been challenged by anything we've encountered in space. The galaxy is a remarkably peaceful place compared to Earth. Most species evolved as either predators or prey, then developed technology that allowed them to transcend those relationships. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world where everything was trying to kill us. Then we developed technology that made us better at persistence hunting. What does that mean for the future of galactic civilization? It means that as long as everyone continues following the rules, humans will continue pretending that the rules matter to us. But if someone decides to threaten human colonies or our coalition allies, Chen's smile returned, and this time Zektar didn't flinch. Well, let's hope it never comes to that. The coalition transport ships arrived precisely on schedule, their sleek hulls reflecting Xerium Prime's dual suns as they descended through the atmosphere. Within hours, every trace of coalition presence would be evacuated from the planet, leaving behind only empty buildings and the lingering memory of what had happened in the jungle. As Zektar filed his mission report that evening, he followed Captain Chen's suggestion and omitted every detail that mattered. Standard tactical operation. Enemy withdrew due to unsustainable casualties. Mission objectives achieved within acceptable loss parameters. But late at night, in the privacy of his quarters aboard the Coalition dreadnought, Zektar made personal notes that would never be included in any official record. Notes about 12 soldiers who could terrorize 800 enemy warriors without firing a shot. Notes about humans who treated alien technology like familiar tools and turned defensive systems into weapons against their operators. Notes about a species that had spent 20 years pretending to be civilized members of galactic society, while possessing capabilities that could reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy. And in the deepest encryption his personal systems could provide, Zektar wrote a single line that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The humans are not what we think they are, and the galaxy is not ready for what they actually are.